Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Zach Drew.
And I'm Andrew Bellers.
Listen, we're going to be talking about inflation, mortgages, famine, pestilence, Social Security, and a lot of different things on today's program. It's going to be jam-packed, multiple topics. But before we get into it, I need to be very clear, and I need you to take me very seriously when I say this. I'm not hyping this up. I'm not trying to say like, this content's going to be super juicy, so you're going to want to make sure you tune in today's show. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm being dead serious with you whenever I'm saying there's a day coming very soon when if you're watching on YouTube, you will not be able to watch us, okay? I don't just mean, well, they're kicking off all the conservatives. We already have 2 strikes, all right? YouTube has notified us that we have already received our 2nd strike a couple of weeks ago. That's why we couldn't post for 2 weeks. We have 1 more strike. And once we have that final strike, we are permanently off of YouTube. All of our content that's on YouTube will be forever gone. Now, I do want to be honest with you. Zach, have more faith. But I'm going to be honest with you. It makes me a little nervous because even though our YouTube audience is only less than 1,000 people, they are faithful to this ministry. They stand with this ministry. In large part, we do what we do with the financial gifts that people give to this ministry from our small YouTube audience. So please, whenever you tune in on a Friday night and I'm no longer there and Andrew is no longer there, we have been kicked off and we will not be coming back. So don't be like, well, we'll find out what happened in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. No, you won't if you keep listening to YouTube. And I am going to say this. And I'm not just saying it to be my own hype man. I didn't even mention in the title what we're going to be talking about at the end of the program. But there's a very good chance that this is going to be the final show on YouTube. Okay? So we are the enemy. Guys like us are the enemy. We're the enemy of the philosophy of this age, of this world. We present truth in a singular manner, and that truth has a name, and his name is Jesus. In today's philosophy of how truth is to be filtered and processed in the postmodern mindset, there is no truth, or there can be truth, but no one knows what it is. It's not definitive. It's not absolute. It's fluid. It's experiential, and we're saying no, it's not. There are definitive truths that there is one way to heaven. There is one mediator between God and man, and that is Jesus Christ. And the deceptions of this world, whenever we are bringing to light the things that are hidden in the dark, which has been mandated through the Word of God for Christians to have nothing to do with the dark deeds done in secret, but rather to expose them, to bring them into the light. That is what we do, and that is why we are the enemy. We are the enemy. And listen, I'm telling you right now, 6 companies, 6, control 90% of everything you read, everything you listen to, all the content. Think about that for a moment. If you're not awake, Christ does not want us to be woke, but he does want us to be awake. And if you are awake, then you understand what I'm saying. But the vast, overwhelming majority of the world are not awake, which means that everything they know in their mind, every piece of information, of content that make up their worldview, how they process life as a whole, comes from 6 companies. That is absurd. And those 6 companies are Comcast, Disney, AT&T, Sony, Fox, and Paramount Global. And obviously, those companies own many companies beneath them, right?
Right.
Listen, if you aren't getting your news from outside of these 5, you are suffering. You don't know what is happening. And you can't trust Fox News.
No.
Listen, there's an article right here. It says, Christian conservatives, you cannot put your trust in Fox News. In the words of CEO of Fox News, Suzanne Scott, she said this. And they're talking about how they just hired on transgender Caitlyn Jenner. Okay? It says, Caitlyn's story is an inspiration to us all. She is a trailblazer in the LGBTQ plus community, and her illustrious career spans a variety of fields that will be a tremendous asset for our audience. This is supposedly the #1 conservative news outlet. Listen, Christians, you cannot trust Fox News. If you aren't getting your news from an alternative news source, you're suffering. That's your #1 conservative news network today. We're gonna get into the show, but I also want to be clear with you. January, February, and March, everything was good. The last month or so, donations have totally been down, and I want you to get involved. Please consider getting involved. Get involved in a big way, in whatever you can do. And I've even said before, if 10% of our viewing audience gave $30 every month in a recurring way, every month, January through December, we'd be able to pay for everything that we do, all TV airtime included. If 10% of the numbers that we know we've been given from the networks that watch our program, if 10% gave $30 a month, now obviously it doesn't seem like $10 is going to do it, and that's why a lot of people have stepped up and said, "I'm going to give you 50. I'm going to give 100." we have one individual that will go nameless that gives $800 every single month. One of our most faithful partners. We have another partner that gives $500. He and his wife every single month. Listen, please get involved. If you want to, go to ZachDrewShow.com. Click the bright orange donate button. You can donate there through PayPal or Tithely, and you can hit that monthly recurring button so you don't have to worry about it anymore. Or you can write us, Zach Drew Show, and that's P.O. Box 797, Decatur, Illinois 62525. Please get involved in a regular, recurring way of this program. Anything you want to say? Because that was a quick. I'm going to keep going. You good? You want me to?
I think you should keep going because we have a lot to get through today.
We have a lot, and that's all.
And I want to make sure we get to all of it.
That's why I'm trying to talk fast here. Jesus in Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, his disciples came to him and said, "What are the signs of the times?" You know this. Matthew 24, and I'm going to read verse 7 and 8. Jesus says this: "Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in diverse places, and all these are the beginning of sorrows." Or another translation might say the birth pains. It's beginning to be the end of time. And I believe that we are in the end of times. Now, we don't know what that means. We don't know if the time of sorrows is 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. We don't know if the time of sorrows is 200 years. Mm-hmm. But I do believe we are in the time of sorrows. Inflation, war, and food shortage. They all go hand in hand. Go ahead and put up the next article on the screen. We are in an inflation crisis. The real inflation numbers are 17%. The inflation crisis of 2022 is now worse than anything that we experienced during the 1970s. Most Americans don't realize this, but we truly have entered historic territory. The inflation crisis of 2022 has now escalated to a level that is beyond anything that we experienced during the horrible Jimmy Carter era of the 1970s. If you were old enough to have been alive back then, you probably remember the constant headlines about inflation. And you also probably remember that it seemed like the impotent administration in power in Washington was powerless to do anything about it. In other words, it was a lot like what we are going through today. Unfortunately for us, this new economic crisis is still only in the very early chapters. So understand, we're going to get to it. We're truly at 17%, which blows out of the water anything that took place prior in the 70s and 80s. And we're at the beginning of it. They're at the height of it. Of course, the mainstream media would like us to believe that what we are experiencing today is not even close to what Americans went through in the late 70s and early 80s. According to CNN, the U.S. inflation rate hit a peak of 14.6% in the first half of 1980. Quote from CNN here: "The inflation rate hit a record 14.6 in March and April of 1980. It helped to lead the Carters' defeat in that fall's election. It also led to some significant changes in the U.S. economy." So compared to that, the numbers we have been given in early 2022 seem rather tame, and it's purposeful. It's deceitful. Okay, they're not the real numbers. because we learned that the official rate of inflation in the U.S. hit 8.5% in the month of March. It says this: prices that consumers pay for everyday items surged in March to their highest level since the early days of the Reagan administration, according to the Labor Department data release. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI, which measures a wide-ranging basket of goods and services, jumped 8.5% from a year ago on an unadjusted basis, above even the already elevated Dow Jones estimate of 8.4%. So 8.5% is obviously much lower than 14.6%. And so to most people, it would seem logical to conclude that we are still a long way from the kind of nightmarish crisis that our nation endured during the waning days of the Carter administration. But is that the truth? In reality, we can't make a straight comparison between the official rate of inflation in 2022 and the official rate of inflation in 1980. The way that the inflation rate is calculated has been changed more than 20 times since 1980. And every time it was changed, the goal was to make the official rate of inflation appear to be lower. What we really need is an apples-to-apples comparison, and fortunately, John Williams over at shadowstats.com has done that math for us. According to Williams, if the inflation rate was still calculated the exact same way it was in 1980, the official rate of inflation would be somewhere around 17% right now. 17%. That means that the inflation that we are seeing now is even worse than anything the Americans went through during the Jimmy Carter era. Listen, vehicle prices have surged by 39.7% in the past 12 months. Home prices in the United States have jumped 32.6% over the past 2 years. We've entered a full-blown inflationary nightmare, and the Biden administration is trying to blame Vladimir Putin for it. Needless to say, that is extremely disingenuous of Biden, because prices were already skyrocketing even before the war in Ukraine started. But it is true that the war is making economic problems even worse all over the globe, and it isn't going to end anytime soon. And this is a great question that Michael Snyder poses here in The Economic Collapse. And so what happens if another black swan event or two hits us later in 2022? We are so vulnerable right now, and it wouldn't take much at all to push us over the edge and into an unprecedented worldwide crisis of epic proportions.
The more that they lie about the situation, the more that they manipulate these numbers. I mean, I've heard a number of people say that the crash of 2008 should have been much bigger than it was. And really, what we're going to experience, what is inevitable, is really the crash that we should have experienced. And I think that we need to start getting realistic about this. We need to start getting prepared, because it's not going to be good.
That's right. Listen, and we know it's all being manipulated, okay? Why? Because the Federal Reserve is trying anything they can do to save us from a recession and even a depression, which, by the way, I truly believe is unavoidable. So they did the same thing, in both the 1970s and the 1980s. The United States was pushed into a recession, okay? And it was caused by what? It was an oil embargo against the country. So OPEC instituted the embargo. One of the effects of this was hyperinflation, which meant that the price of goods and services rose extremely fast. Now, to counteract hyperinflation, the Federal Reserve raised short-term interest rates. Now, that made money in savings accounts worth a little bit more, but on the other hand, all interest rates rose dramatically. So the cost of borrowing money increased too. That's why, if you remember, you buying a home back then, your interest rates was 16, 18, 20% interest. Now, actually, here's more on that, okay? As well as mortgage rates and Social Security. I'm going to play this clip. It's of Glenn Beck and Carol Roth, who was a former investment banker and author of The War on Small Business.
In 1980, the highest inflation rate was 14.6, and we had 20% mortgage rates. 2022, according to Shadow Stats, which is calculating the way we calculated inflation in 1980, our inflation rate is 17.1%. And our Our mortgage, our lending rates are now 0.5% to the banks. That seems a little crazy.
Yeah, it seems like a little bit of a mismatch of policy. Obviously, a lot to unpack there, but this is why people are so angry with the Federal Reserve. They have been on the forefront of causing this issue by artificially suppressing interest rates and printing trillions of dollars that have, in part, caused this inflation. And then, they were buying securities, putting them on their balance sheet, part of what suppresses interest rates, up until last month. Then all of a sudden they got the wake-up call going, oh boy, inflation's pretty high, even though it's been trending at incredible levels for well over a year. And now all of a sudden, oh, we have to do something, and they're still not doing it fast enough. But the rub on all of this is it's very hard for them to do anything without putting us into a recession. So they are caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, kind of. Oh, gee, I remember saying this. Kind of at a place where there are no good options and they're out of bullets. Isn't Social Security increases based on CPI?
You just read this is exactly where I was going with it. So they have a couple of, no, this is good. We're always sympathetic on these things, Glad. So the reason why they want to keep the headline number down is because it allows them to print more money. It keeps you from panicking. But like you said, there are a lot of things that, the numbers for inflation feed into, like you said, Social Security and other programs that have cost of living adjustments. So this is another way for the government to continue to cheat.
Inflation, war, food shortage, they all go hand in hand. Let's take a quick look at the second horseman of Revelation, which is war, and the third horseman of Revelation, which is famine. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come," and out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." Listen, this is the natural order of events. Historically speaking, war creates famine. So it's no accident that the second horse is that of war, the red horse of war. And it's no accident that the third horse, which immediately precedes it, is saying that there's a famine throughout the world. Famine is often a result of politics, not production. Remember that, just like we are seeing today. Let's take a deeper look into the famine and what we can expect next. So we're going to be playing a video of David Friedberg, who is an early Google executive who started the farming insurance company, Climate Corporation. He just told the All In podcast that the Earth operates on a 90-day food supply. Listen to Mr. Friedberg as he issues a warning to the world about the coming catastrophic food crisis.
15% of the world's calories come from wheat. About a third of that wheat comes from Russia, Ukraine. Russia has banned export of wheat. The wheat spring planting season is like now, this week, and there's not a lot of planting going on. So not only is the current wheat supply in Russia, Ukraine blocked up and cannot make its way to countries in Africa and elsewhere, but the future planting season is now significantly at risk. And again, that's 15% of global calories. And just to take a step back, the whole planet Earth operates on a 90-day food supply. Once we stop making food, humans run out of food in 90 days. And that's not just linearly across all nations. What happens is the most vulnerable nations lose their food supply first, and the richer nations buy that food supply to secure their population calories. And so you very quickly see a bifurcation happen where suddenly famine is a real risk. And we already have about 800 million people on Earth that are subsisting on below 1,200 calories a day. So this very quickly tips the bucket in a significant way in a number of countries that's going to be really awful. And that's just on the wheat supply and wheat planting problem.
I believe that the stage has been set, and we don't know the Lord's timetable. But I do believe, like I said, we're in the end times.
Yeah.
Everything is ready. we don't know, like I said, the Lord's timetable of when it's going to come to fruition.
Yeah, I think about clips like the video that we just played, and I think really the systems that we rely on, the systems that we trust, are much more vulnerable than we believe. There's a book written by Ted Koppel called Lights Out. He did an entire book about what would happen if a cyber attack attacked our grid. And basically, he was sitting down with government officials and not getting answers to questions. And at the end of all of it, he came to this conclusion. If the grid went down, or if we experienced, catastrophic famine, if the food supply chain shut down, we would be on our own. There aren't systems in place to support us. If you're waiting on the government, if you think that FEMA is going to rush in and save you in situations like this, if you think there are, bunkers under stadiums where they've got water and food, that doesn't exist. When stuff like this happens, when it hits the fan, we are largely going to be completely alone.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm not fearful. I don't think you should ever be fearful.
Right.
But just be practical.
Yes.
I think it's very important to stock up on groceries, canned food. Most canned food has a couple years shelf life, and stock up on some freeze dried food. We don't offer it. You can find it. Just find it lots of places. Everyone else offers it, but you should. You should have some 20-year shelf life food. I think it's important. Let's talk about COVID. There are certain words that I'm not going to say, but they'll be flashed on the screen. The reason why is to try to prevent us from getting kicked off different places that we air. Because the algorithms pick up our words, People are taking there it is on the screen, and they are passing away. And life insurance companies are ruling it as a suicide, rendering your contract void and not paying out your policy. Pretty shocking. This is why we're going to be kicked off. So, once again, those of you that watch us on YouTube, if we're not here next week, please go find us on Facebook, go on Rumble. Obviously, we're on DirecTV every Saturday night, 9 p.m., on WHT, Central Standard Time. We're also on the PTL network through Comcast Cable, but we're in 9 million homes, so that puts us in select markets by big cities. Take a listen to this important video of attorney Todd Callender discussing those details.
So I'm hearing these reports that life insurance companies are having skyrocketing rates of payouts of policies. What's happening?
Well, if they're going to pay them out, in all likelihood, they won't pay them out. The reason why they won't is twofold. Number one, the margins are too thin in that business. You're making 1.5% or something like that when you're underwriting this kind of risk. Secondarily, every contract like this, whether it's morbidity or whether it's mortality contracts, having the exclusions that we're not going to pay a claim if you undertook experimental therapy. And there was a case came out, I guess, about 3 weeks ago. It'll be a landmark case, and the judge looked at this and effectively called the person who took the experimental shot, who died, called it a suicide. He characterized it as a suicide because you knew or should have known that you were taking part in a highly dangerous activity called a phase 3 clinical trial, and therefore you voided the coverage under the contract. The insurance company does not have to pay that claim. In fact, any insurance company that has that kind of provision in their exclusions, and I can guarantee almost all will not have to pay claims.
It's pretty unbelievable. Pretty unbelievable. Once again, a quote here from him. The court specifically found that participation in clinical trials is so hazardous that it voids the coverage of the insurance contract. You should have known, quote, they treated it for purposes of the law as a suicide. The court is saying participating in a phase 3 clinical trial is suicide. That's the conclusion. The real epidemic is now. People's immune systems are being destroyed at an alarming rate, and the studies have been published that mortality numbers are higher than ever.
Yeah, and sadly, I mean, we didn't know exactly what would do, but we did know that it was experimental. We did know that, the companies that created this were going to be completely free from liability. We knew that a couple of years ago. This thing wasn't even approved by the FDA until last year.
That's right.
So
here's the last video of the day. We're running out of time. It's pretty shocking, so buckle up.
What caused this excess mortality? It must have something to do with the so-called, of course.
Yes.
It may be the lipid nanoparticles. It may be the spike protein. I don't know. What do you know about this?
I do know. It's not even a question.
Okay, go ahead.
We have figured this out. So the lipid nanoparticles think of them like little bombers, and they're carrying payloads. And those payloads are oligonucleotides, messenger RNA, and synthetic DNA. Those are the payloads of these little bombers. In order to slip those little bombers past the human's natural immunity, they had to disarm people's natural immunity. They used 3 different HIV proteins, the GP120, the AD5 as an adjuvant, and the PP14. Those 3 proteins were injected into the humans for the purpose of allowing the lipid nanoparticle bombers to go into the cells, deliver those payloads, and then create synthetic DNA. When you see a 1,100% increase in all-cause morbidity and mortality, that means something systemic has caused this problem. When you see all of them arising to hundreds of percentiles in a class of people who are physically fit from 18 to 45, these are all military people, there is only one cause for that, and that is the destruction of their immune system. So that is the induced autoimmune deficiency syndrome. We know this now. The short answer to this whole thing is that everybody that got the shots was given some form or level of AIDS, autoimmune deficiency syndrome. The real epidemic is now. I happen to be in the morbidity business. I'm the CEO of a large insurance group, and we underwrite morbidity risks, principally disability, accident, sickness, and health. Based on what it is we are seeing, the rates right now, excess mortality at 84%, excess every kind of disease at 1,100%, we are expecting a 5,000 or so % increase in excess mortality for this year. An enormous number. I don't think that it's by coincidence, by the way, that Moderna has now just received licensure of their emergency use authorization HIV. So they gave everybody AIDS, and now here's your salvation, which seems to be a multiple dose.
Pretty shocking, right? Pretty shocking. People, we're living in the end times. It is so important that you are prepared practically, but it is so much more important that you are prepared spiritually. We're living in exciting days. It's the best of times and the worst of times. But you were called, you were ordained by God to be in this physical world right here, right now. It is by no accident. And He's not going to call you somewhere to be somewhere without equipping you to how to get through these things, right? So have faith. Have faith in Jesus. Get into your word. Once again, Matthew 24 says this, and this is what we're seeing. Nation rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There's going to be famine, pestilence, earthquakes in diverse places. But listen, all of these are the beginning of sorrows. Get into your word. We'll see you next week.